Alexander Vale, one of the richest investors on the East Coast, woke up this morning to the sound of rain beating against the panoramic windows of his penthouse. His day was supposed to be ordinary: a meeting with the board of directors, negotiations with politicians, an evening charity ball. But a message was already waiting on his phone that would turn everything upside down. "We found the documents. They will destroy everything." These words appeared in an anonymous letter sent at 4 in the morning. Alexander reread it over and over, as if hoping the text would change. His fingers trembled, although he was always collected and cold. He could feel the ice cracking under his feet, although the floor was marble. "No. This is impossible," he whispered, feeling a wave of fear rise in his chest. At the board meeting, printouts were thrown at him. Everyone looked at him in disbelief. The documents talked about illegal deals from 10 years ago, about offshore accounts, about how his first millions had been made on the blood of small companies he had destroyed. He remembered those times, the late-night negotiations, the pressure on competitors, the bribes. He had built an empire from scratch, but he had always believed that the winners would not be judged. "It's a fake," he said firmly, but his voice trembled treacherously. "Someone wants to destroy me." But he could see in the eyes of his partners, they no longer believed. The evening news showed his portrait next to the words, "A financial empire built on lies." It all seemed like a dream, a nightmare in which you scream but no one hears. At night he sat alone in a dark office. The clock struck 3. His heart clenched with fear and anger. He suddenly remembered the words of his late father, "Money is just a mirror. It will show you who you really are." And now in this mirror he saw himself, not a winner, but a person who had lost everything. The act ends with his scream into the void. "Who did this to me? Who betrayed me?" The following weeks became like a siege. Journalists did not leave his house, partners one after another refused to cooperate, and lawyers spoke in hints. They said that the case could not be whitewashed, there was too much evidence. "You have to understand, Mr. Vale," said one of the lawyers, "this is not just an attack by competitors. It all looks as if someone close to you helped put the puzzle together. Someone who knew the details." These words hit harder than any scandal. He immediately thought of his sister Margaret, to whom he had once entrusted a share of the business, and of his former partner Lawrence, whom he had dismissed 10 years earlier. Who of them? Who had let him so close to stab him in the back? The phones were silent, his friends had disappeared. Even his beloved Lily had left the luxurious penthouse, writing briefly, "I cannot live a lie." When the government announced an official investigation, Alexander realized, this was war. His empire began to crumble like a house of cards. The company's shares collapsed, the accounts were frozen. His name had become a curse in business circles. One evening he went into his empty office. He was sitting in a leather chair and could smell dust and emptiness. Suddenly the TV turned on, another interview with Lawrence. The former partner, once his right-hand man, was now speaking in front of the cameras. "I was silent for a long time. But the truth must come out. We all have the right to know at what cost he became who he is." Alexander clenched his fists. It seemed to him that his lungs were burning. He understood, this was a personal betrayal. But at the same time, deep down, he felt something worse than anger. Part of what was said was true. He left the office in the rain, completely alone. That evening he understood, he had lost not only his fortune, but also his own name. "Do I have anything else?" he whispered quietly to himself. And in this silence, the only answer was the echo. He disappeared from the radar for a week. He turned off his phones, stopped meeting, went to the city of his childhood, where the winds drive paper cups along the empty embankment and something in the salty air reminds him of a beginning that had no stains. Alexander walked past the old warehouse that had once belonged to his father and opened the metal door with a rusty key that he had carried for many years for sentimental reasons. Inside were dust, wooden pallets, and a safe in the wall. He remembered the combination with the touch of his fingers, like a child's prayer. Click. Inside were a recorder, a few photo cards and an envelope marked, "For son, when silence comes." His father's voice on the recorder was rough but warm. "Son, if you are listening to this, then someone has already given you a blow from the inside. Don't trust those who applaud you. Trust those who tell you no." The photos showed young Lawrence with some strangers near the Aurora Trust sign. Back, dates, amounts, the initials, M.V., Margaret Weil. Inside the envelope was a key to a safe deposit box at a private bank on Fifth Avenue, and a brief note, "They don't destroy, they take when you're weak." When he returned to the motel where he had rented a room under another name, there was a knock on the door. Standing in the doorway was a short woman in a cheap coat and hat, with eyes that were used to seeing the truth without makeup. "My name is Emma King. I'm a journalist. I wrote you a letter." "Why?" he asked dryly. "Because I was in on their game too. My brother worked in Aurora's compliance department. He was found dead a year ago. The verdict was suicide." "I don't believe it." They sat in an empty coffee shop, the steam from the cups rising over the table like mist over cold water. Emma spread out in front of him printouts, offshore schemes, arrows between funds, political committees, consultants. "Your name was used as a cover for a dirtier money column," she whispered. "Lawrence negotiated not on your behalf, but on behalf of Aurora, and Margaret passed on the inside information and the board's votes in exchange for a promise to be the face of the purge after your downfall. She, my sister," the words cut into her throat. "And Lily? They made her leave." Emma clenched her fists. "They threatened her with publications about the family. They were counting on your loneliness." In the bank on Fifth, a cell opened like a scene from a movie you're afraid to watch. In the drawer is the handwritten, black book of his father's accountant, codes, authentic signatures, cassettes with 10-year-old negotiations. On one tape is Lawrence's voice, "As long as he's greedy for growth, we're greedy for him." The second voice is calm, metallic, "When the time comes, we'll send the bill." A pause. "Sister ready?" "Ready." Alexander felt a spring contracting inside him. Disgust and shame fought like two waves meeting on a shallow bank. He himself was paving the way for someone else's trap, building an empire so high that it was convenient for the shadows below to hide. "Emma," he said, "if I make this public, they will tear me down completely. And if not, they will finish you off with their hands," she replied. "The choice is up to who presses the button, you or them." At night he sat over the black book and listened to the August rain beating against the window. Every line contained his past, not everything was fake. Some sins were his, some were others, attributed to him. He understood, the truth does not wash white, it remains stained, but it stops stinking. And then came a discovery that turned his world upside down. In the third package of cassettes there was a recording with the voice of his father, who 15 years ago warned Lawrence about invisible partners. The father knew and kept silent so that his son would have a chance to rise, cleaner. The betrayal began long before him. At dawn, Alexander looked up from the document and felt a strange silence inside, as if after a storm. For the first time he saw the map of the labyrinth. At the edge of the page, Emma left a short line, "The question is not whether you are guilty or not. The question is who you will be when the truth comes out of the basement." And he realized, it was time to go into the light, even if it burned. He returned to the city as if he were entering a ring without gloves. The lawyers begged him to wait, to play the game of negotiation, to find a decent way out. Alexander listened and remained silent, like a man who had already chosen his sentence. "You will lose everything," whispered the chief counsel. "I have already lost," he replied. "All that remains is to decide what it was for." He had arranged a meeting for Lawrence and Margaret in his old office, a glass tower that pierced the sky like a pike. The cameras were off, but Emma, disguised as a technician, had set up a microphone in a vase of artificial lilies. When the door closed, Alexander was not sitting, he was standing by the window, his hands in his pockets, like a captain returning to a sinking ship. "You did it yourself, Alex," Lawrence smiled. "The market punished us. We only accelerated a fair trial." "Fair?" he nodded at his sister. "Is that what we call it now?" Margaret couldn't bear to look him straight in the eye. "You always chose money," she whispered. "I was just your shadow. They promised me the management of a clean company. I thought I was saving my family." "You sold it for parts," he said calmly. "And me too. Just forgot I was alive." The words hurt like an operation without anesthesia, but he hadn't come to win. He had come to burn. "Here," Alexander put the black book on the table, "is the story of our honor. I'm giving it to the prosecutor's office. But first, publicly. I'm going to go on television and say, yes, I pushed, I was tough. And so it was, my team, my partner, and my sister used my name for the scheme. And now I'm going to get back everything I can." "You're crazy," Lawrence hissed. "You won't survive after this." "I'm not trying to survive as a brand," Alexander replied. "I'm trying to survive as a person." That same evening he went live on the largest channel. Emma sat in the equipment room, clutching her headphones as if praying. He spoke without papers, about the pressure of the system and his own greed, about deals that are covered in the dust of people's ruined plans. And about how Aurora Trust had turned from a money laundering operation into a mechanism for control, over markets, people, stories. "I'm not asking for forgiveness as a discount," he said in the end. "I'm asking for the right to repay the debt." Within an hour, copies of the Black Book were online, and the recordings of the office meeting, with Lawrence and Margaret's voices, were leaked to an independent editorial office. The market went into a frenzy. The prosecutor's office announced the formation of a joint investigative team. Lawrence disappeared. Margaret texted him a quick, "Sorry." He looked at him for a long moment, then said, "We'll talk in court, and at home." The next step was money, his last weapon and his heaviest burden. He set up a restitution fund for victims of the most aggressive takeovers and sold everything he could to fill it: paintings, a yacht, a house overlooking the bay. The lawyers called it shooting himself in the foot. He called it starting to walk. "Do you really think this will make a difference?" Emma asked as they left the studio into the night of cameras and wet asphalt. "I don't know," he said. "But for the first time, I'm not hiding the hand that presses the button." When he was handed the summons for the first hearing, he smiled as if someone had finally called him by his real name. It was all or nothing, and he chose all, even if that all meant giving him away. The courtroom smelled of a mixture of coffee, paper, and fear. Alexander sat on the bench, listening as the prosecutor laid out his life on shelves, where he had overestimated himself, where he had lied, where he had closed his eyes and called it the market. His lawyer talked about cooperation, about the restitution fund, about the systemic corruption. He didn't argue with the facts, he argued with the past that stood behind him. When he was given the floor, he stood up. "I could say that I was forced. But the truth is simpler, I chose the shortcuts myself. And they are very easy to take when you are fast. I am not asking for leniency. I am asking that you see with me those who pulled the strings in the shadows. I will give all the names. And I will accept the consequences." The verdict turned out to be more complicated than the headline. He was given probation, a ban on holding executive positions, and multi-million-dollar fines that he agreed to double for the benefit of the foundation. For Lawrence, an arrest warrant and an international wanted list. For Margaret, a plea bargain and a public apology. When she left the courthouse, she approached him, her eyes broken. "I didn't know how else to do it," she said. "We both knew," he put his hand on her shoulder. "But now we know that it's possible to do it differently. He moved into a small apartment in a neighborhood where you could hear students laughing at night. In the mornings, he drove to the foundation's office, where he listened to the stories of people he once called obstacles, the owner of a small pharmacy chain that went bankrupt after a hostile takeover, an engineer who was laid off on her child's birthday, an accountant from his first company who had been treating anxiety for 10 years. He learned to be silent and not to make excuses. Sometimes in the evenings I called Emma, not as the hero of a report, but as someone learning to see the world outside the schedules. "I thought you wouldn't last," she had said once. "Me too," he smiled. "But it turns out there's something in me that can't be taken away, the ability to start over." One day Lily knocked on the door. She was holding an envelope, an old postcard from their first vacation together, signed, "Once upon a time we were simple." "I'm proud of what you've done," she said, sitting down opposite him. "But I'm not going back to a life where your conscience depends on my presence." "I'm not asking," he replied quietly. "This is the first time I've had anyone to talk to besides myself. And the first time I'm not asking to be loved for my brilliance." They talked late into the night, about the cats at the shelter where she volunteers, about books, about cities that smell of bread. Their conversation wasn't a bridge back, it was a bridge forward, to different but brighter shores. When the Aurora Trust was officially unraveled in a congressional hearing, a senator asked him under oath, "Mr. Vail, do you think it's possible to be rich and honest in today's world?" He thought longer than television would allow. "You can be transparent and honest," he said. "And rich, if you're willing to be slow. Honesty doesn't scale well. But that's why it's valuable. I don't know if I'll ever be rich in numbers again. I definitely want to be rich in giving." On his way home, he stopped by the window of an old shop, where neither a penthouse nor titles were reflected, only a man in a simple coat, tired and straight. "Money is a mirror," his father would say. Now the mirror showed not glitter but features. He touched the glass as if it were skin. Far away, beyond the city, the stars winked through the smog, like beacons that never tire. Is truth more important than success? Perhaps true success is when you have enough truth to not be afraid of questions. Can you buy back the past? No, but you can pay interest to the future. Can you be rich and honest? Probably yes, if you let honesty define what wealth is. And when there is silence, you will hear, behind the window, finally, you can see a person.